So Spies in Disguise is a animated action spy picture, which I kind of had low hopes for. It's from Blue Sky Animation. You know, might know the people who've done the Ice Age films. But Blue Sky has actually had some interesting films in the past. They've done some experimental stuff with like the Peanuts movie. I absolutely love the Peanuts movie from 2015. Spies in Disguise, I was kind of... I mean, it looked slick. I like the design of it. You know, it wasn't that detailed, but it looked slick enough where it could have a lot of action. It looked like there was plenty of action. Going to be lots of slapstick. I get it, but I wasn't exactly thrilled about it. But I gotta admit, I was legitimately surprised by how much I really dug this film. Not so much for its story as opposed to like its grander message of the film. That being said, I really did like the action. So the story is basically Will Smith voices Lance Sterling. You know, your basic, hotshot super spy. He's cocky. He dresses in a fancy suit. He's got all kinds of fancy tech. He's great at getting around terrorists and escaping from a tough situation. He likes the odds mounted against him. And he plays by his own rules. Doesn't go by doesn't go strictly by the American agency he works for. It's like he's your typical James Bond type character. We get it. But what I find interesting is that with his gadgets, it feels like a fairly standard spy action film. The way that it starts up, the way that it introduces him, and his nemesis of like the evil, I want to say Dr. Claw, only because the villain here. I'll admit this. The villain is called Killian. He's voiced by Ben Mendelsohn. And he's probably the most generic spy villain you could think of. He's got like a hideous, deformation on his face. He's got a mechanical claw. He's super smart at like getting out of tough situations. He's sinister looking. He dresses sharply. Typical, lukewarm James Bond villain. But what I find interesting is... part of the people who makes his gadgets is the youngest member of his kind of gadget team called Walter, who's voiced by Tom Holland. And we kind of start off following Walter at first because he's kind of the more interesting character here. They set him up pretty clearly as a character with pathos, because we start off with him as a kid. And he's talking about how he wants to help his mom, who's a cop. So he invents all this, like, wonderful little, like, gadgets that shoot glitter. And they're meant to, like, help people more than hurt people. And they have such a great relationship that you look at that scene, I'm just like, okay, this mom's gonna die. This mom's gonna die. They set it up to be so freaking sweet and make, Walter so young here that by the time he gets older, yes, of course... the mom is going to be dead, which kind of, fuels him to do better and help out in the world. But I kind of like how they reveal it. They chose just the right part of the film to reveal it, and reveal it just the right amount. Like, not like the Playmobil movie where like the cops show up to his house and say, oh, by the way, your mom's dead. Or they show the hideous explosion or car crash or whatever. No. Because the thing I love about this film is it actually has a great mindset of trying to make the world better as opposed to just blowing it up. Now, it kind of stumbles around this, but I kind of dig that this is kind of like the grander point of the film. Because Walter is not liked by Lance. Lance prefers that Walter should make him grenades and explosions and guns, flamethrowers and stuff like that. And he wants to make, protection balls, like what he calls like the inflatable hug. I don't know if anyone remembers the late 90s version of the Avengers. Not the Marvel Avengers, but the Spy Avengers, which I wouldn't be surprised they stole this from. But there's a scene where the heroes, the spies, have like a big inflatable ball that they walk in. And that's literally what he invents here. I'm surprised they don't reference more of that stuff. But basically, Walter wants to find ways to disable the enemies without just explosions and blowing stuff up and killing people. Whereas Lance favors the mindset that he keeps stating of, we need to fight fire with fire. Now, of course, this is a flawed aspect to his character because we know, if fire fights fire, then someone gets burned. And thankfully, they don't say that until much later into the picture because it seems fairly obvious. But, eventually, yeah, they do have to work together and they need to find a way to save the day without killing more people, because they soon realize, yes, because if you do more violence on top of violence, it just leads to more violence. It doesn't really solve much of anything. So there's an interesting philosophy here. But of course, in order to make that happen, Lance accidentally ends up turning into a pigeon. Now, this kind of works to his benefit, because at the time that Lance comes to Walter, he needs his help because he's been accused of a crime, which he didn't commit, obviously, so we got a fugitive thing going here. Except he can be in disguise now as a pigeon. He didn't want to be a pigeon, but now he's a pigeon. And so while they try to figure out a cure, they also have got to stop this really, kind of standard spy plot of like trying to stop this drone that could just go on all these missions to kill as many people as possible. So fairly standard James Bond type stuff, but I like how the inhumanity of the drone is kind of pointed out, as a bigger factor, and violence begetting violence, just makes us more inhuman, and that whole angle. But that being said, even with all this great philosophy that it has within the film, it still has lots of great slapstick. The direction is very witty and sharp. I like that they actually make Walter fairly intelligent here, and a lot of his research fairly scientific. They mention a cloaca. That pigeons have a cloaca. In fact, they mention it several times. So good luck to parents trying to explain that. There's a little bit of like adult humor here and there, like what happens in the submarine. What happens in the submarine stays in the submarine. They mentioned 50 Shades of Grey at one point, which I don't mind. That's kind of like par for the course for animated comedies for the family. Insert a little bit of like adult humor here and there that only adults will pick up on. But, all that stuff's fine. I expected that, and it's pretty funny. I love the slow motion stuff they tried here. The action is funny. Will Smith has great line delivery, as he always does. It's always fun to see Will Smith, just like snap out of his, his usually somber roles and get back to that fun Will Smith. I got a little bit of that with Aladdin. I didn't get any of that with Gemini Man, and I longed for it. And now, Spies in Disguise, I got it back. I got more of that fun Will Smith that he does so well, and I always loved seeing. Looking forward to seeing him in Bad Boys 3 as well. Tom Holland gives kind of the performance you expect. Him performed as like Spider-Man. He plays basically the role you kind of expect here. Ben Mendelsohn just does, typical villain stuff. He's playing basically a typical villain who's not really that interesting, and that aspect of the story isn't as unique. But I gotta admit, in terms of the gadgets that Walter comes up with, like not just the inflatable hug, but like I think he has like basically like the sonic screwdriver from Doctor Who. And it can do all sorts of crazy crap. Like at one point it can essentially just make all the bones in your body turn to jello, which does lead to some kind of funny little gross out humor here and there. And he has like a great little bomb that sets off glitter and shows off cats because, he basically says like, it can evoke an emotional response. Now it goes about it a little bit clunky towards the end of the film. Like when we get to the end of the film, it's basically just a mash of crazy, kooky and glittery gadgets to, showcase, you don't have to be, you can kill them with kindness, basically. You can fight your wars without just guns and bombs, which I do like as a philosophy, except they kind of overdo it to be a little bit too silly, where I kind of feel like it might get lost, but I get the feeling like, okay, if you want to hammer this home point, if you want to hammer home this philosophy for kids, you do have to make it relatable and you do have to make it fun. And they thankfully do. It might get a little bit lost along the way for some kids, but I think the grander message won't be lost on them about, how violence just begetting violence, is not a great way, to proceed through life, which I honestly didn't expect that kind of philosophy to come from an animated spy film, of all things. Like, there is lots of great action here, there's lots of great explosions and fun little gadgets and stuff like that. But I do like how it's almost kind of like a postmodernism on kind of like James Bond. Like, I always hated the fact that James Bond would always just dunk on Q. It's like Q gave you all this cool crap to save the day, and you just break it, and you mock Q. It's like, the dude has these smarts. You should take advantage of them and not just like look down on him. Which I kind of like that they do point out in this film. Like, basically, I love the whole pigeon aspect because it means that Lance needs Walter, and he needs his philosophy and his science to both save the day and save himself. So yeah, I was rather surprised by this film. Like, the spy plot in general is pretty generic. Didn't really dig it, but the buddy comedy aspect here, especially like a lot of the writing and the slapstick and just the general philosophy about a perspective on violence, I gotta admit it really won me over. So yeah, I wish it could have delivered a little bit better. It feels like it kind of phones in the ending here, where everything kind of goes to a happy ending a little too comfortably, where I kind of feel like there should have been just a little bit more to shake the boat here. But as it stands, I actually really enjoyed the picture. It was quite a bit of fun. So, Spies in Disguise, 3.5 out of 4. Not 3.5 out of 5 stars. What a great start to the new year.